Mhm. Well, when Ryan asked me to talk, this is, I think, the second time, I think I was here. Cam asked me to talk about 5 or 6 years ago, I think. Yeah, and there was a Albany investors meeting at one time. Uh, that was in the mid 80s. It was really interesting because everyone had a different perspective on how they approached investing in real estate. Um, but I'm the only one that's still around from that club. I don't know if that's saying anything. But interesting. How many people here are realtors? Okay. And how many people here are builders or have a contractor's license? And how many people here are property managers? Okay. How many people, let's see now, are appraisers? We got one appraiser. I'm an appraiser. So I thought it might be helpful to give you a little bit of idea of the journey that I went on and the decisions I made, I think might be helpful. Um, when I graduated from college, well, going back even further than that, before I even went to college, I I passed the California real estate uh, salesman's exam when I was 17. So the day I turned 18, I was a realtor. So that summer, I decided to be a realtor, and I didn't sell anything. So when I went to college, I said, well, what can I do with real estate that I don't have to sell anything? And ended up, that would be property management and appraising. So when I got out of college, I started appraising. In San Diego, I did appraising, and then interest rates went up to 9%. And I was the only one of two appraisers at Gibraltar Savings and Loan. It was an institution that later failed. And I went out in the field, came back, and my boss laid me off and 9 loan officers. Yeah, instantly. So things happen really quick when interest rates go up. After that, I came up to Albany. I got a job at Linn County Assessor's Office, a residential appraiser, then commercial and industrial, sawmills, concrete batch plants, industrial stuff. And then there was another recession, and I got laid off. So then I had bought some lots when I worked at the assessor's office. I had 9 rentals while I was there, but I got laid off, and I thought, well, I'll just build a duplex. So while I was building a duplex, one of my friends from the assessor's office that also got laid off, he said, hey, we got something going on in Eugene. I went down to Eugene. I worked there till interest rates went up again, and I got laid off again. So you can see what's happening here. There's no job stability, at least in that appraising, because the volatility with interest rates. Well, why was that happening? And the reason why it was happening is because the Fed was raising interest rates, right? So you think we have pain now, with a few banks failing. Back then, it was horrific. 600 banks would fail. So when I started appraising, I just got a pipeline of appraisal work. But the appraisal work wasn't lender work. It was foreclosure work. So banks need appraisal when they make a loan. They need an appraisal when the loan gets foreclosed to book the loan, so that way the feds or regulators know whether or not they need to foreclose on the bank. So that kind of led me down the path of, oh, well, there's all these foreclosures I'm appraising. They might be some pretty good deals in here. And there were. And so I couldn't buy any of the ones that I appraised, but I bought others that were available. And there was a pipeline of foreclosures. So that was in the early 80s. So what I would do is I never could understand people that would fix and flip. although there's people very skilled at that, especially since the last Great Recession, very skilled folks that do that. But the problem is you pay regular tax on the gain, not a capital gains tax. You don't get the opportunity of a 1031 exchange, and you don't get the opportunity for appreciation. So I held on to the properties, and we've slowly started selling a few. Let's see, what other things I wanted to talk about. General takeaways. So we all invest daily in whatever we're doing. You get up every day and you have opportunities to go right or left, whatever you're doing. Whatever you're doing by definition is investing, right? And if you're real estate investing, in order to do that, you have to have a kernel of capital, right? Kernel of capital. And in order to get that, you need to be frugal. So when I first started, I'd have roommates. And roommates would help out the rent. In fact, the first house I bought, I didn't move into that I bought. I fixed it up and rented it, and paid $100 a month to Brian Orr. You may remember, he's a realtor in Albany. We were roommates, and so I was able to, I thought that was kind of a house hacking, but that led me to get more capital to invest. Let's see. So since then, I'm fairly risk adverse. Real estate is something that's really difficult to get a good deal on, because there's a multitude of different lenders that'll lend on it. There's different kinds of financing mechanisms that allow you to buy it. You have a hard money lender, seller carry finance. That was a lot of what we did earlier, not so much now. And then it used to be that the banks would only lend to good borrowers, and they'd have what we called at the time mouse houses. They'd be finance companies, and the finance companies would be able to finance people with less than good credit, but at a higher interest rate. Now, when you go to get a loan, there are all kinds of different types of loans that you can get, which is good if you want to borrow, but the problem is it makes it easy for everyone else to borrow. And if it's everyone else can borrow, then you have a lot of competition to purchase property. And it's difficult to get a good deal that way. So I developed apartments. I bought apartments, duplexes, fourplexes. Mostly they would meet this criteria because I'm a value add investor. So I never, even though I'm an appraiser, commercial appraiser, I've never bought anything on a cap rate until 6 months ago because it didn't make any sense to me. And a couple of takeaways, and the reason why is that the pro formas that are provided by the seller, the realtor, whoever, are unrealistic in regard to capital expenses and operating expenses, in my opinion. So when I would be doing an appraisal on an apartment building or other commercial property, I'd look at it and what it was being purchased for or what other properties were being purchased for, they didn't adequately consider the amount of expense associated with maintaining the property. One of the reasons why I manage my own property is when I bought apartment buildings that were not performing, they were not performing because the property manager wasn't properly maintaining the property, because the property manager is kind of in a middleman position. The tenants want a whole lot of services and cheap rent, and the landlord wants to make maximum cash flow, and the property manager's right in the middle, right? Unless the property managers coach the property owner to understand the expenses associated with managing the property, is going to be a struggle for the owner. There's another reason that I think it's important to manage your own property and to think about repairing your own property, is you get a sense of understanding what are the components of the cost of that roof, the cost of putting in a floor, right? If you get bids and I did this with my son who bought a foreclosure a couple of years ago. He got bids for his roof of like $26,000. Well, I knew the materials were about $2,200. So we got in a rig, we went up to where we get roofing, and I go, we need what, 26 squares of material with all these parts. What is the cost, right? Big, vast difference, right? So we ended up tearing it off and finding someone to help us to roof it. If you're a new investor, I think you got to do that. You got to do that, because otherwise your roof's going to fail, the carpet or flooring is going to go out. If you're going to try and get ahead without pulling money out of your pocket, you got to self-perform a lot of stuff. So there is a trade-off though, time. You know, you might have another job, you might not have the skill, that kind of thing. But I highly encourage you to try and do whatever you can on your own, and then trade with someone to try and keep the expenses down. Now, just in the last month, I learned from 2 different lenders that we lend from, that we borrow money from, and a civil engineer that I use, that my business model is different than most other people's business model. Now, what would that mean? Why is that? The reason why is like I was saying earlier, by learning, by doing, you're struggling, you're getting, it's easier to write a check to have someone roof your house, right, than you trying to figure out what is a roof jack, you know, what material to get, you know, that kind of thing. It's frustrating. But if you learn this stuff, you'll be able to add value at less of a cost, right? And so what we do in our business is we self-perform a lot of stuff. So out in Philomath, if you go on the way to the coast, just before you get to town on the right, we're building a storage facility, right? And then to the north of that, we're building an RV park. And the reason why we're able to do that, well, we could go get a bank loan, but we self-perform. And the reason why we self-perform as much as we can is because, interesting concept, that if you get a big bank loan, they expect you to pay the loan back, right? So if a typical real estate deal is the bank will lend you regardless of whatever the appraisal is. Doesn't really matter, even though I'm an appraiser, interestingly enough. What they do is they look at the appraisal report to see what kind of net operating income is being generated. And then they go, okay, was the debt service associated in relation to that net operating income? And then they apply a debt coverage service ratio, which is a percentage. So they'll lend, depending on the flavor of the month, the liquidity that the bank has, and the bank's policies, a debt coverage service ratio of 1.1 to 1.3 for a typical transaction. But by the time you get done, after you built the project, you know, you're managing the project, finding that you get 10% cash flow after all this hard work, and oh, you get to do this for the next 30 years, just doesn't seem like very appealing to me. So we work really hard to self-perform. By self-performing, we're not as fast as the next guy, but we are being able to do it at much less cost than our competitors, which I think is helpful because you have less debt. I'm debt adverse. Let's see, a couple takeaways that I think might be helpful because we have a diverse group here is my grandfather was a realtor / appraiser. And back then you didn't need to be licensed to be an appraiser. You could be a realtor and just say you're an appraiser. Actually, you could just say anyone could be an appraiser. You could just, I'm an appraiser. They weren't licensed back in those days. So it was interesting because when they licensed appraisers in Oregon, there really was what you needed to go through was much easier than what it is now. Let's see, what was that point? So my grandfather, he was an appraiser and realtor. And he told me, you do not make money appraising. You make money knowing how to appraise. So one takeaway is that appraising is really good in a sense that you understand the market. You understand the dynamics of the market. And I think market participants, particularly realtors, get a sense of that. The strength of the market and the changes in the market. Another thing is interesting is what I've tried to make be a student of is people that make smart decisions in real estate, but also people that don't make smart decisions in real estate, right? And it's just not people in investing that make stupid decisions, it's banks, right? So in the last going around in the Great Recession, there'd be banks that make a loan and didn't even know they bought the property because the property was so poorly appraised. But they didn't know that. So the consequence of that is there's opportunities because those properties won't perform, there'll be too much debt, that kind of thing. I don't see that happening again because the laws that put in place to protect appraisers from being influenced by whoever. Now, when we get an appraisal order, we can't talk to the realtor, we can't talk to the mortgage broker, we can't talk to anyone because we don't want lender pressure. Back in those days, you didn't just appraise the property, you appraised your client because you didn't know what they were going to do with that appraisal. So, I mentioned that you don't make money appraising. What my grandfather said, you don't make money appraising, you make money knowing how to appraise. I changed that a little bit. You don't make money working, you make money investing, right? Now, the presumption is everyone, this is my take, everyone thinks that you got to work really hard to get a good job that pays well. And maybe that's good, yeah. But if you'll notice something, if you get a well-paying job, you have a silent partner that takes a pretty good chunk of your change every month, right? And so I've changed my opinion a little bit to, it doesn't matter what job you have, you just have to be competent and highly skilled and be able to save money, right? If you can do that, right? Then you have that seed corn that you can plant to invest. Now, I mentioned earlier about inflation. Even though I'm an appraiser and, they say property values are going up, I look at it a little bit differently. I can't really tell whether or not properties or values are going up, but I'm absolutely sure the value of the dollar is going down. And when I think about it, the real estate is a perfect hedge for inflation, because any new substitute for it has to be priced in land development costs and labor costs to build a brand new apartment, house, that kind of thing. So the home that sold, I heard this a couple weeks ago, someone bought their home finished, it was 1,600 square feet for $23,000 in the 1960s in Albany. Yeah, that was market. That was probably top of the market back then. So, did anyone have any questions about why it's important to have a job that you're competent at, so you can save money to invest? Is that pretty clear? Yeah. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about is grit. So grit, I gave a talk about that last week at our company meeting, but you have to be tenacious, right? Now, but I think in a benevolent way, in the sense that, at least for me, what I do is I'm constantly competing against the amorphous market, right? It's not any particular individual, but I don't know that I'm smarter than anyone. I don't know that I'm faster than anyone. I'm certainly not. I'm pretty good looking according to my wife, I guess. But I felt at the time that I could outwork anyone, right? Yeah, and I would be tenacious in that. And I think just the fact that you're here, it is an opportunity for you to succeed, because there's a lot of people that aren't here and aren't thinking the way you guys are. I mentioned how it's important to fix and learn how to fix and repair real estate, and how important it is to self-perform projects to save money. Let's see now. Another takeaway is I think it's important to read some of these investment books. I know Zach likes Bigger Pockets. That's one thing to take away. There's such a smorgasbord of real estate books that you can read. It's unbelievable. And what's crazy to me is, the business schools, you can get MBAs in real estate now. It wasn't really much of a thing 20 years ago, but some of those people in the real estate departments, in my opinion, have no practical knowledge on how to invest. They might be able to advise a REIT, right, that has billions of dollars in pension fund money, but that isn't helpful to any of us here, right? And so you might get an MBA in real estate at a prestigious university. It's absolutely worthless if you're trying to figure out, how to fix real estate and repair and manage real estate, because that's a local endeavor. Another thing that is interesting is this is the land of opportunity. And what do I mean by that? Well, there's a peculiar thing that's going on here in Oregon, and it's Oregon's land use system. right? So in 1970s, they passed these laws that protect farmland. Now, the farmland that you see as you cross the bridge, and between here and Lebanon or going down I-5, it's grass seed farmland. Very important food stock for us. We all depend on grass seed to live on. They're protecting that farmland. What they're not doing is protecting housing affordability. They're creating artificial scarcity. That's what's happening. And still that narrative is still continuing. And when you talk to planners at cities, there was in the 1970s, the way it was sold to us is at the time, because I was pretty young then, what is sold to is as the population grew, they would add more, they expand the urban growth boundaries so there would be more land available to develop, and which would make the natural order of expansion of cities more confined, but it would not result in housing unaffordability. That's exactly what it's done. So what I did early on is I bought land. And I just sit on it, and I got 140 acres of land, and it's just sitting there, and I don't have to do anything with it. It just goes up in value every year because of housing scarcity. It's from the perspective, if you're a developer, right, or a property owner like us, the appreciating rents, appreciating values is very helpful, right? It makes our balance sheet look really good. It makes us wealthier. Absolutely horrible public policy, in my opinion. The homeless list that you see, I don't know that is a result of housing affordability. Some people think so. Could be irresponsibility, but the amount of scarcity and the competition renters have to find a place to live that's affordable, completely unnecessary. But from my perspective, I bought land early on, and so I just wait until I want to develop it. But I don't know if that's a political statement, but I'm thinking about this in terms of economics, and the economics is not favorable for housing affordability. Next thing is our partners. Our partners are our employees who we try and protect. Most real estate companies are, at least historically, are ones that grow, and then when the project's done, they lay everyone off. And that's just the nature of the business. And what I was trying to do is, and we've been successful in that, is to have a real estate company that when the market turns, we don't lay anyone off, right? And so having team members that can feel comfortable and rewarded regardless of economic conditions is a good thing. The next thing is lenders. They're our partners too. And occasionally I hear people say, well, I have this real estate deal, I want to do this, whatever. If you're not showing any income, you're not going to get a loan, right? So you're going to have to pay, in order to get a sizable loan, you're going to have to pay taxes, because the regulators are not going to let the banks lend to somebody that isn't showing any income. You may make it a lot of money and bearing it somehow, but unless you have some income to show in your tax return, you won't get a loan. And the lenders are actually wonderful partners. So all of us deposit money in the banks, and then the banks decide, okay, what do we do? They invest the money. They invested poorly in mortgage-backed securities and treasuries at low interest rates, and then they went up, and so their value of their bonds went down. there's a bank in this community that has $100 million in capital, but they're, because they bought mortgage-backed securities when interest rates are low, they have a negative balance on their balance sheet of $60 million. And this is only a $1 billion institution. I'm not going to say which one you want to pull your money out of, but the point is that your lenders are your partners. And so you want to protect your lenders. You want them to feel comfortable in lending to you. So what I do is I create a financial statement so that way it does all their work for them, right? As long as they trust what I'm putting on the Excel spreadsheet. Next thing is because real estate, what you're probably observing is even if you bought real estate, it isn't like late night TV shows say is that you're not going to be retiring in 2 years, right? This is a 30-year commitment, right? You're not going to, where you're going to do really well is you're going to have to take care of your tenants for a very long time, right? What's the consequence of that? So let's say you buy a property for 400 grand, I don't know. Over time, we know that value is going to go up. We don't know why. Is it inflation? Is it appreciation? But we don't care. We know it's going to go up over time. And we also know that you're going to pay the debt off over time, or more precisely, your tenant's going to pay the debt off over time. So what I'm looking for is at the end of the 30 years, this equity. That's what I'm looking for. In order to do that, you have to hang in there a long time. And sometimes it's not a lot of fun. Now, is anyone investing with their spouse? Okay. Oh. Okay, this is a takeaway. A lot of times I see a couple buying a house or a duplex or something like that, and they're really excited about buying it. Oh, we're going to live happily ever after, until 2 years later, they've had to deal with 3 horrible tenants and muck out the unit, right? Well, there's Little League going on, and someone has to go play soccer. And so what happens is that because the benefit of owning real estate is so deferred, you're dealing in the present with, Johnny going to soccer practice. That's a lot more fun. Or your friends are doing something on Friday night, but you're working. You need to work on a rental, unless your spouse is on board, right? That is critical, because I've seen a lot of real estate opportunities they give up on them because the spouse or the team there gives up, and it's unfortunate, I think. Let's see. Next thing, I think that, and maybe because I'm older than everyone here, maybe, is you hear discussions about what's the economy doing, what's the politics associated with whatever's happening in any given day or election cycle. Where we're at is a pretty good place. So even though those are all interesting concepts, right? What's the economy doing, what the politics are doing, I would suggest you just completely put that aside. Your goal, you have a property, it needs to be fixed up. There's, I think, about 18,000 tenants, probably more than that, probably 20,000 tenants in Benton County, right? you just have to keep your property in better condition than the competitor next door. If you can just do that, you'll be successful, regardless of whatever politics or whatever the economy's doing. So in other words, don't worry about the economy. Another thing I think is what I've done is I'd be future focused. So I may make mistakes on a daily basis. What I'm trying to do is minimize the mistakes, but I'm always thinking about the future, what opportunities will be in the future, and we're constantly always thinking about future projects, because if you I have 61 employees, so, and about half of them are in construction. So if we have to wait 6 months for a permit, because we never know when we're going to get a permit, right? We have to have all these balls in the air, and so that way when it's convenient to us, we're able to move forward on the project. I think that's about it for things I wanted to talk about. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts?
So
Jason.
when you started off on your own, you eventually, like you said, you all have to go do the wood ourselves, paint the walls ourselves. At what point did you start adding team members in, employees in? Did you ever have any partners in the finance side? How did you start and expand your growth? You couldn't do it all by yourself.
No, that's right. So I had about 30 rentals, and I had to make a decision because it was basically me, Angie, and I think her mom and her mom's boyfriend, and that we would go around fixing up places, or friends, or I'd have contractors. And I had to think, well, I'm full-time appraising, and then in the evenings or weekends, I'm working on this stuff. Not the greatest quality of life, right? And so you have to make a decision about hiring employees. And so at about 30 rentals, I hired a maintenance person. And how many maintenance folks do we have now?
Just maintenance, like
14? Yeah, we have 14 maintenance folks now. And so I'm not sure, although we have a great team, one way a realtor, there was a realtor in Albany named Bill Segrist, and south of Queen Avenue, he built most of that with a partner. And he told me, he said, all I have is 10 single-family residences that I rent, and I manage them myself. And I thought that was perfect, right? If you just had 10 rentals and you could probably manage them yourself and maintain them yourself, maybe with someone's help. Yeah, you wouldn't have to be foolish like me and have, we have quite a few mouths to feed, I would say. So, and it's a lot more complicated. We have a lot more opportunities, right? But I think some of you, that might be appealing to you, right? Instead of scaling up, right? You may like your job, and this is something you want to do on your own, on the side. Just having a few rentals and getting them paid off would be really good. Yeah. Yep.
You mentioned that you're debt adverse. Is that just now, or is that an practical investment career?
Forever. Yeah. So a typical foreclosure deal would be something like this. It would be, I buy the property on the courthouse steps or whatever. Let's say 60 grand, 100 grand, whatever it is. Then what I do is I'd probably put 20 or 30% cash into the deal. Then I'd fix it up for cash flow for my rental properties, right? Which would not add any more debt. And then I'd refinance at about 60 to 70,000. Then, and I'd get a favorable rate loan. So up until about 2 years ago, I only had one negative cash flowing property. Now I have none. So they all cash flow, except when there's CapEx expenses, when there's a roof that needs to go on or a furnace or that kind of thing. So I think I could have grown a lot faster and a lot bigger if I would have taken a lot more debt. But the result of that would have been a lot more risk, right? And so you have a choice. You can have 200 doors, or you can have 1,000 doors, right? But you can make the same money with 200 doors if you have less debt. And I don't want to deal with 1,000 doors and all the mechanics of the tenants moving in and out and the maintenance staff in order to fix all those. I'd rather have less multifamily units and less debt. Yeah.
What's your thought on the market cycle? So the reasoning I ask that is during the COVID, interest rates were really low, and there was a lot of multifamily homes that were purchased at very low rate, but now they pay them on a 5-year interest only, and that balloon's about to bust. You can say now their interest rates are going to be really high. Do you feel like in the next year or two we're going to be entering that opportunity where at least some of these multifamily homes are going to get sold because the interest rates are really high and they're selling them at low to get rid of it? Just want to see what your thoughts are.
So I don't see the tax code changing that would affect things. But if the biggest component of a cap rate is the lender's loan, because like we discussed earlier, about 60 to 70% of the capital in a deal is from a bank, right? And so the out of the capital stack. So if you have a loan that's repricing, right? And let's say you were at 3.5% and now you're at 5 or 6, then the cap rate's got to go up in the market, right? And what's going to happen is the value of those properties will decline. So that's in theory. But we haven't seen any capitulation yet, right? We haven't seen the residential market capitulate. Interest rates have went up, but because there's a 1 month supply of housing for properties less than 400,000 in Albany, there's still situations where there's bidding wars, right? Until that inventory gets up there, then property values won't decline. I think what you might be describing is larger institutional grade properties though. And by definition, they're completely valued based on the income approach. And if out of the net operating income, if more of the net operating income is needed to service debt because of higher interest rates, then the value of the property has to decline, right? What I'm interested in is these very sophisticated MBA types that were running these huge real estate pension funds and REITs, and you may have heard about them, BlackRock, a couple others. They just gave the properties back to the lender, right? There's a lot of very large real estate deals that were dependent on these low interest rates, but all you need and this is the fear that I have because you can't predict the future. If you're leveraged at the max and you have, unexpected continuing expenses or unexpected continuing vacancies, now you're upside down. Now you're feeding the beast, or you're letting the property go back to the bank. So I think what's kind of interesting is in Portland, what I hear is like 30 to 40% of the office space is vacant. Well, if those properties were financed in the last 10 years, then those properties are upside down, right? And while this is kind of interesting, that might be an opportunity, right? Because someone's losing their property, and well, sometimes I think this development thing that I'm doing is a complete waste of time, right? What I should really be doing is sailing around the world, going camping, whatever, and just waiting for a recession and buying things that have replacement costs. Problem is, you never know when that's going to occur or if it'll occur. So, okay.
Curious what you do about taxable income. From what you were saying, it sounds like you're long-term hold, so you'll hold things for a really long period of time. And in the multifamily space, we usually keep things for 3 to 5 years. We'll 1031 exchange and then take advantage of like cost saves for all that extra depreciation so we can offset our income from our rental. Do you have any other kinds of strategies that you use since you're a long-term hold and you're not, you say you'll sell, so what do you do about taxes?
So we do cost segs on our new projects. The long-term hold, some of the properties, they don't have any depreciation left. So a wise strategy would be, I guess, selling those and buying something new so I can start the depreciation cycle again. I haven't really done that, and the reason why is because I'm familiar with the properties. I don't know how I'm going to replace those properties in my market, because my target market, I want to be half an hour, I don't want my maintenance folks to be more than a half an hour, 45 minutes from my office, right? So if I could replace those, that would be fine. I'm not adverse to paying taxes. It's kind of well, yeah, I am when the bills due. Right now, in theory, but I'd rather have a stable asset that's generating good cash flow than cycling it and that kind of thing. Yeah. Oh, let me respond to one thing. If I did what you were saying, I could have grown a lot faster, a lot quicker. I just it goes to what is the right size of the number of doors that you might want. Yeah.
Yeah, could you describe your process going from a few properties to 30 properties and kind of how long it took you to grow it, kind of in the initial stages?
Oh, how long I've been doing this?
No, how long did it take you to go from 1 or 2 properties to 30 properties?
Well, I have more than 30 properties. I have over 200 properties.
Yeah,
The beginning.
that initial.
Well, I think at the beginning, the opportunities came in waves during recessions. And what's interesting is in times when the market is really good, I guess you'd say, or appreciating, I just didn't find anything that would make any sense. And then the market would correct, and then there'd be a bunch of available properties. Now, to put this in perspective, right now, the last few years, we think, oh, the real estate game's been pretty good. Property values are appreciating. They're going to appreciate forever. It was, 2009 through 2012 where people were thinking the values of the property would never go up again. They're just going down. That isn't that long ago. Now, I'm not predicting that that's going to happen, but it could. And you just need to be prepared for that. You need to be bankable when the economy turns. Let me continue on that thought. When we were the only one that got a construction loan from Umpqua Bank in 2009 in their entire footprint because we kept our loans low and we built all the way through the recession, right? Because we had low debt. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You could say you can't predict the future, obviously, but it sounds like you do kind of.
I'm sorry?
You can't predict the future.
Right.
But it sounds like you do kind of buy during the recessions.
Yeah.
Right? So like you do kind of wait for those moments and then capitalize on it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what our strategy, or my strategy, I guess, is we're building, right? And we bought a office complex in Albany recently. So we're growing our portfolio, if you want to call it that. But we also have dry powder if there's something that is available. I think that, at least for me, my perspective is I'm somewhere between a large institutional lender and a lot of people in this room, right? Because when you're competing in, this was kind of interesting, when in this Albany Real Estate Investment Club, even though there's a lot of foreclosures and there was a lot of deals, the people in the club were competing each other because there was no one else buying the property because it was a recession. So very interesting. But there's a lot of competition in the to buy in probably less than $600,000, right? And because the narrative is still, it's good to buy real estate. I could be sitting on a beach with a Corona if I buy real estate. It's easy if I buy real estate, all these different interesting narratives. And because of that, until that psychology gets broken, right, which typically occurs because there's a labor market contraction or interest rates going up and construction stops. But you don't know when that's going to occur. Yeah. Yeah.
When did you get into self-storage? You do a lot of that. You built
Right.
big one in Albany most recently, and now you're building this one in Columbus. When did you get into that? How did you get into it?
Very interesting. So I got an appraisal to do a self-storage. So the bank gave me in South Albany, there's one just before on Pacific, just before you go down. So the bank had me do the appraisal, and when you get an appraisal, they give you all the financials and they give you all the costs, right? And I go, well, this is interesting. Maybe I could do this. At that point, because I was risk adverse, I thought, well, and this sounds weird now, but I thought that something would happen at Huachang that was a nuclear disaster or something, and all my tenants would leave, and then I'd have all this debt service. It just seems strange to me now, but I was thinking that way. But in any event, I was worried about having a stable tenants, and I thought this would be an alternative. So what I ended up doing in my first storage facility is I found 3 acres of land next to railroad tracks that I bought for 12 grand because it couldn't get sewer, right? Even though the main sewer trunk line went right by it, the city wouldn't let you tap it. And so the realtor that was working, helped me at the time, Elsie Landauer, she approached the neighbor, and there was a house there. And so I bought the house for $1 and take over payments. And we found them a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath. So that was back in 1991. So 91, we built the first storage facility, and then Lebanon, 93, I think Corvallis, 97, and now we're in, I think Philomath will be our 12th storage facility. Yeah.
So staying on the subject of storage facilities, is the size of the land the constraint as to how many units, or is there some magic number of this is how many storage units I need to break even? Or is it just, you said you started with 3?
Yeah, the biggest expense that you're going to have is management. So you have to get over the break even. So you have to get over the break even level, and that's typically having management. You don't need a big storage facility if you self-manage it, right? Because your only expenses are lights and property taxes, heat maybe, that kind of thing. And so some small storage facilities work, right? We don't build small storage facilities. We build huge storage facilities. So our storage facility, we're coming out of the ground at 153,000 square feet. And our next phase will be another 50,000. So if someone wants to enter the market and wants to compete, we're ready to go. Yep.
Following up on that question, if I might. So from the comparison between, I happened to leave after last month's discussion, speaker talking about how challenges are for evicting people and the notices. Much different, I would assume, for storage units. And so the difference of who doesn't pay storage fees, eviction type situations versus your single family homes, apartments, how do those compare?
Well, at one time they're exactly the same. The landlord could go to the front door and change the locks. It's been a long time since they've been able to do that. I don't really know how, I'm interested in all investment properties in this context because I think of us as a bank. I'm interested in getting annuity income monthly, and I don't know if I really care where I get it from. Could be apartments, could be duplexes, could be commercial, could be storage facilities, it doesn't matter. Some are more difficult to manage. I think that's your question. If you're a small landlord and you have an obstinate tenant and they go to legal aid and the legal aid attorney sends you a demand letter that they want you to give them 3 months free rent and it's unjustified and things like it, and then you have to hire an attorney, all kinds of situations like that. I'm not exactly sure the consequences. If we already know that there's a shortage in the market, and the way some people try and deal with that is they try and create all these laws, right? Thinking that it's going to help the consumer, in this case, a residential tenant. The only way you're going to help the residential tenant is add supply. I mean, if there was a 20% vacancy in our apartments, the thought is we're discriminating, right? Landlords discriminating, so you have these kind of laws. If there was 20% vacancy in properties, no one would be discriminating. No one would be you know, it'd be a competitive market. Instead of a favorable bargaining position for the landlord, it'd be a favorable bargaining position for the tenant. It's not a favorable bargaining position for the tenant, but that's a result of Oregon's land use laws. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah. And rent control.
I was gonna say, when you were sharing that story about the storage unit you put together and you bought the house for $1 to assume the mortgage that was existing, you have another story where you did something creative to put a deal together similar to that you want to share?
Yeah. So, yes. So the in order to finance this stuff, you have to be somewhat creative. So in the Great Recession, what I would do is I would get some loans over here to finance the purchase or construction of something over here. But the key to it is, and you wouldn't think this, is I have these homes on my balance sheet, but the homes on my balance sheet, the homes don't really make a lot of money, but they do appreciate. And as a result of that, I could offer those to a bank and I go, I know you don't really want to lend to me on this over here, but you have some collateral over here and you can't buy a cheeseburger with equity, right? So why don't you look, secure this over here so I can build this over here. And I did that quite a bit in the beginning. And the reason why is because the lenders would say yes. I had to get them to a point where they could say yes, and at a favorable interest rate. Yeah.
And did you find yourself in a position where you were stretching your debt like beyond that 70% threshold that you were talking about earlier that you like to stay at?
No.
Okay.
Where I get stretched is cash flow. If I have 3 projects going on simultaneously, and some of that is self-funded and not bank-funded, then it makes it interesting, particularly on November 15th when property taxes are due. And then we got to do a lot of shuffling then.
You mentioned you don't use cap rates for valuation. How do you assess your value?
Very good question. So what I'm interested in is after repaired value. Okay, so how do I get the after repaired value is what can I do to create the rents to get the value where it should be, right? The target property that I'm interested in is compromised legally, either legally, environmentally, financially, physically. There's deferred maintenance, it's dated, something I can do to change the property, right? And also it's helpful if the property is being mismanaged. If the property is being mismanaged, then there may be actually nothing wrong with the property. It's just that the management hasn't kept the rents up or it has neglected the property. Did you want to say something?
Or they were embezzling?
Oh, yeah. And in some instances, the managers were embezzling, right? So they're embezzling from the properties. This is an interesting story. So the Blue Ox RV Park, I bought it in the last recession. It went into foreclosure because the owner didn't pay his property taxes. He was making his mortgage payments, but wasn't paying his property taxes. So the bank was very frustrated with him because the mortgage, instead of it going down, it was going up every year because they'd add property taxes. And he wasn't getting along with the bank, and he wasn't getting along with the city of Albany over water and sewer rates. So anyway, I knew the property was in foreclosure, And so the bank can't negotiate with me without a agreement with the seller. So I got an agreement with the seller to purchase the property, and I then went to the bank to negotiate with them about their loan. And they said, well, we want to dump this, we want to get rid of it. We're so frustrated with this guy. We want to get rid of him. So we set up an appointment to go look at the property, and I show up, Angie shows up, and I'm looking at all real estate, what needs to be fixed, how can we fix this kind of thing. And I have the income statement here, and it shows that the property manager is making $34,000 a year. But Ange notices that she's driving a Lexus.
And she had a Kate Spade purse.
And she had a Kate Spade purse. And I go, so? And she says, well, I don't have a Kate Spade purse. Yeah. Yeah.
I said, something's fishy here.
Yeah. So then the dynamics were this, when we took over ownership, we immediately, she was prohibited being in the office. She was now, bathroom detail. And she left 2 weeks later. But we wouldn't let her touch anything. But it was an opportunity because it was being mismanaged, but the owner didn't know it. He trusted the manager so much. Yeah. So, to answer your question, it's very difficult to buy commercial property without considering the cap rate. It's just that unless there's adequate provision for maintenance and capital expenses to repair it, it's hard to get there sometimes because there are other investors that will want to buy it before me. Yeah. It was an assumable VA loan. Yeah, which I'm not sure. Well, actually, I'm not sure. I'm a VA appraiser. I'm not sure if they allow that anymore. But once the loan was assigned to me, he couldn't get another VA loan until I paid the loan off. That was kind of interesting. So it was just another technique that we used, I didn't use, but some of these other real estate investor types did, is they'd wrap the loan, right? So there'd be a favorable low interest rate loan, and to sell the property and get your equity out because interest rates are high, what they do is they'd bump the interest rate 1 or 2%, which are still below market. And so the buyer of the home would buy it at, let's say, 6%, and then turn around and make a payment on the loan at 4%. Right, which they don't do. I haven't seen that done for a while around here. Or seller carried financing. That may come back if interest rates go up. Yeah.
You've done enough work, at least with the city of Albany that I know of, with their grants and fixing up properties downtown, utilizing that. Talk about that process and how that's going.
Well, the way I think about it is I want to invest, this is my own personal thing, I want to invest in fixing and building things in my community, right? I feel like, I don't know if it's a duty or responsibility, but I feel that if we can take on that assignment, that job, then and we don't do something stupid while we're doing it, then I want to give it a shot. So in order for those to work in downtown Albany, we have to self-perform those. And the reason why is it scares the heck out of contractors. They look at the building and they don't know what to bid, right? And the scale of the project is so large that the bids that come back are ridiculous. So, and it hasn't been helpful that the market, there's been a shortage of contractors, so there's a favorable bargaining position for contractors. And sometimes, because I have contractor friends, sometimes what they think is, well, if I'm going to get out a bid and it's going to be a difficult project, you're going to have to pay me double. They don't say it like that, but because there's more hassle. There's so many gravy jobs that they could do. Why would they do one of these old buildings? I also, by self-performing, I'm thinking that we're going to get better and more efficient. I occasionally, week by week, have my doubts about that. I think that we will get there, but there's a lot of risk associated with it, as opposed to just building something residential or storage facility. But I think we have the capacity to do it. We have the team to do it. When we'll get these finished, I'm not sure. Yeah.
It's creative.
It's a head scratcher, or more brain damage, maybe I should say that. Yeah.
What's the process like of CARA getting funds?
Oh, so I'm not sure if you're familiar, but the city of Albany had a urban renewal district, and the purpose of it when it started was to fix the old buildings. So I did a study of all the sales in a 10-year period until I think about 3 years ago. And what do you think the average price of old buildings in downtown Albany was during that 10-year period, including the land? You can guess anything per square foot, I mean, per square foot.
10-year period ending 3 years ago.
Yeah, on average, yeah, ending about 4 years ago. 4 years ago. Under $100 a square foot. $32 a square foot. These old buildings would sell for. And the reason why they're selling, if you think about it, if the land is worth $10 a foot or something, right, then the value attributed to the improvement is $10 a foot or something. I don't know, but it's quite a bit less. So a prudent business practice, and I would say it's prudent, it's not favored by the city, is you'd buy these old buildings and then you'd let the tenant, you'd fix the roof occasionally, and you'd let the tenant make the tenant improvements, but the tenant are not owners, so they would never fix up the building adequately, right? And they'd never invest in their property. And why would they? Because it's cash flowing, right? The tenant will make improvements. So because of this dilemma, not only here, but throughout the United States, they came up with this urban renewal district, at least in Albany, and everyone in Albany contributes to the urban renewal district. And it was originally intended for helping building owners fix old buildings. Do you think that's controversial?
Yep.
That the government gives money to private investors? Anyone think it's controversial?
I want to know who put all the million lights downtown, and it's like 1 every 5 feet.
Well, that was part of it, right? But those improvements were public projects. Remember, it was originally going to be money given to private developers to fix buildings, not to fix streets, right? Well, there's a lot of controversy in giving money to building owners, right? Sometimes the city gave money to building owners and they didn't do a good job, or they didn't do anything. They weren't underwriting the development as prudently as a lender would, right? And so they would hope that someone coming in with no experience would come in and fix up an old building and do it sufficiently well, and with no contractual obligation to perform. So that was the early stages, and that didn't work out somewhat sometimes. We approached the city about doing some projects, the old city hall, and we have a hotel in downtown Albany, and we have the second oldest apartment building, actually the two of the three oldest apartment buildings in Lynn County. And both of them should be renovated completely in the next 3 months.
Is one of those that gray building on First?
Yes.
Okay, I saw one of your trucks, I drive by that fairly frequently, I saw one of your trucks up there.
Yeah.
So good.
I promise it'll be done in the next 2 years, maybe. That one was a head scratcher. But the city would give money to investors like me to do stupid things and fix up these old buildings. And the hope is that I'll be able to leverage that with the bank, which I have, and be able to build it at less than my budget amount. And that's the risk I have. And because these old buildings are so uncertain, you start digging into them. Oh, you didn't know about this, you didn't know about this. There's a lot of risk there. And so that'll make it challenging and interesting.
When you discussed financing earlier, and you were discussing your existing residential properties to finance projects, was that actually cash out refis, or is that just collateral?
Well, no, you're just offering collateral, right? So the collateral, you could do cash out refis. In the case of the buildings that I have, these old buildings that I'm fixing, I have these other free and clear properties, and I cross collateralize them, right? So that way the bank is never at risk for lending me any of the money on something they might think is stupid, or I might think is stupid. And so I get them to yes, because their loan committee is going to understand they're always secured. So we cross collateralize it. They have a performing asset that they could foreclose on. Once the property gets done, like this property on First Street, then they'll release 5 duplexes that I own. Once it gets stabilized and fully occupied, then they'll release the 5 duplexes. And I like that technique because I don't have to sell anything in order to get the capital. It's less complicated. I don't have to refinance. And eventually the debt is on the property that I'm improving. Another advantage of it is when the interest rates were low, I could get an instantly amortizing 10-year loan at a low rate. If I waited until it was, stabilized and up and running, and I went to the market, there's too much interest rate risk for me. So what I was trying to do is get a low rate fixed for 10 years, which was something that was new about 3 or 4 years ago, that they'd offer 10-year fixed rates. But if they want to make me a loan at 3.5% for 10 years, okay. And I might add here that I don't think banks should be taking interest rate risk, right? When they lend money to me at 3.5%, well, now I don't know what they have to pay to borrow money from, depositors, but if interest rates go any higher, the loan I got at 3.5%, their cost of funds is maybe more than that. And so I don't think that, at least for commercial property, that my personal opinion, if I was a banker, I would make more of maybe a 2 to 4 year adjustable rate mortgage, because the banks at too much risk. And that's why these banks are failing right now, they have all these funds out, right, at low interest rates, and interest rates go up, and the value of those bonds or whatever they invested in, could be loans for that matter, is worth less. But that's my opinion. So, any other questions? Great. All right. Well, anyway, I hope you found whatever I had to say meaningful and purposeful this evening. You're welcome to call me at any time. I like to talk about this stuff. It's kind of my hobby. Anyway, thank you very much.